and welcome to the fourth hearing of the Committee's inquiry into the planning system and the impacts of climate change on the environment and communities. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are meeting today, the communities of the Yuin, Monaro nations. I pay my respect to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. My name is Sue Higginson and I am the chair of the committee. I ask everyone in the room if you could please turn your mobile phones to silent. I'll just do mine. And note that parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence that they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of this hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. Welcome to all of you and thank you for making the time to give evidence today. Could we please, each witness start from my left. Please state your name, position, title and swear either an oath or an affirmation.
My name's David Dixon. I'm a traditional owner and elder in this community, the Dirrangunge people. My position is I'm a board member of the Bega Local Aboriginal Land Council, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
My name is Leanne Atkinson. I am the CEO of Bega Local Aboriginal Land Council, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah, I'm Russell Fitzpatrick, Mayor of Bega Valley Shire, a place I get to call home, this beautiful part of the world. And I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Hi, my name is Anthony McMahon. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Bega Valley Shire Council, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Hi, I'm Emily Harrison. I'm the Director of Community Environment and Planning at Bega Valley Shire Council. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would anyone like to start by making an opening statement?
Yeah, on behalf of the Shire, I'll start making the opening statement. So thank the committee and all the senators for their attendance today and paying attention to this. We've had numerous problems over years with planning, and we're a Shire Council that has 80% national parks and state forests. We have very passionate people who want to protect their environment and work with it as well. So in the Bega Valley Shire, we have had 13 natural disasters since the Black Summer bushfires in 2019-20. While the majority have been flooding events, the biggest impact on our people, infrastructure and livelihoods has been the fires by far. Impacts from flooding have been very low impacts in our Shire. In the fires, we lost 467 homes, over 1,000 outbuildings and many hectares of land. Since the fires, some people haven't been able to rebuild their homes due to bushfire constraints, bail levels, limited insurance, or purely as they are not ready to do so yet. Yet the onus has been placed on council to find solutions. This shouldn't be the responsibility totally of local government. Historically, there has been significant development right on our coastal shorelines. With predicted sea level rises, property owners, developers and council now need to increase floor levels, raise roads and implement other solutions, all of which become costly and take time. We've also had a significant conflict in our Shire between biodiversity and the urgent need for affordable housing. Again, local government is expected to solve this issue, yet we have few levers, if any, to do so. Increasing requirements for bushfire protection, basics and biodiversity offsets are making housing more and more expensive in our Shire, While we need to be proactive in mitigating future impacts and protecting our natural environment, it needs to be proportionate to the risk and balanced with the need for more housing. We have little development land left in the Shire. Finally, the complexity of the planning framework and increasing costs of development are resulted in an increase in illegal and unauthorised development throughout the Shire. In some cases, manufacturers are exploiting perceived loopholes, while in others, people just cannot afford to comply with the system. And we're quite happy to take any questions around that. We didn't actually have a submission into the inquiry, but quite happy to answer questions either by myself, the CEO, or our Director of Planning as they come along. Thank you.
Thank you. And would you like to make any statements?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to attend today. This submission outlines both a serious issue and a potential opportunity. As we know, Aboriginal people are among the most vulnerable when it comes to climate change. Here in the Bega Valley, many Aboriginal people are living in old and poorly insulated social housing. This is not a choice. Aboriginal people in this community are living in conditions that no one should be living in as we transition to hotter summers with more unpredictable weather patterns. Now for a way to take a step forward. What if Aboriginal land councils could be part of the solution, were able to activate land that had been granted through the land claims process to help to create more adaptable housing? Unfortunately, one barrier to achieving this relates to planning. While there is a lot of Crown land currently under claim that is claimable, in many cases it is in a land use zone that is currently incapable of being developed. It may be in an urban area or on an urban fringe, but is not capable of being developed due to a failure to enable rezoning within the current claims assessment process. Right now, Crown Lands runs the land claim process, and no consideration is given to the fact that existing land use zones are often an impediment to development. The only pathway currently is to get a spot rezoning after the land claim has been granted, which is often impossible to achieve. It means that land councils end up with land that they have to manage, but they can't activate. If New South Wales Planning could assist in the process while land claims are under assessment, working hand in hand with Crown Lands, we could identify opportunities for housing development and get the process of rezoning happening prior to it being determined. As we speak, in the Snowy Monero, there are claimable parcels of Crown land in and around towns, and an LEP process is currently underway. But the land under claim is being ignored in the process, even if it is compatible with neighbouring urban land. The intent of the New South Wales Land Rights Act is, in part, to empower Aboriginal people economically and socially. Yet many people in this community do not feel empowered. We need your help to achieve this by bringing planning to the table to enable Aboriginal organisations to become part of the housing solution in the face of a changing climate. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll have some questions.
Sure,
And
I'm happy to kick off.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all of you for being here today and for accommodating the committee with its late start as well, and for welcoming us to this beautiful part of the world. Mr Mayor, just wanting to start off in terms of some of the issues that you raised in the challenges in this area. You outlined 467 homes were lost in terms of the recent bushfires in the area. But of course those homes need to be replaced, and you've had significant growth in this area as well in terms of population, and despite these challenges, more and more people moving here. What areas do you have identified for new housing development within the Shire?
So there's a couple of points there, and if we could just go back a bit. Out of the 467 homes, we've only had 140 DAs actually rebuilt. So there's quite a shortfall of the housing supply we had pre-fires to what we have now. In saying that, we've had land releases in certain areas where they haven't been taken up. We're currently doing a structure plan around Wallumbilla and Bega that will release something like 1,200 blocks into the market. But as Leanne alluded to, some of that doesn't include Crown land and Aboriginal claim land, which it should, because it's in prime residential place, very close to CBDs. And there's a lot of other opportunities you can do. But the biggest problem in our area is the biodiversity offsets and the cost of biodiversity offsets. For example, from a council point of view, we extended our airport and we had to pay $1.2 million to provide public infrastructure as a biodiversity offset. as a local government area. So the ratepayers are actually paying a biodiversity offset for public infrastructure. And the CEO might want to elaborate on that. There's a lot more around that, but that's some of the issues we're facing. As to land releases, we still have land releases happening in some areas, but most then comes the cost of the infrastructure around our services to put water and sewer onto those, and who pays. It becomes very hard. We live in a wonderful area, but it has its topography challenges, that a lot of it's hilly, and then to actually work everything through one sewer treatment plant or one water supply is nearly impossible. We run something like 8 water supplies and about 10 sewer treatments, that you'll correct me when you speak, roughly around those figures. So the infrastructure costs to us are enormous around that, and so are the development costs around it, which are a real problem in our area.
Thank you. Mr. McMahon, did you want to elaborate on some of those points?
Yeah, this is something I will certainly add to that, is that when we do look at our available land for housing and residential development and calculate what we think the yield will be, there are a couple of sort of key factors in that, and probably broadly 2 types of development relating to housing. One is the subdivision stage, which is the creation of the lots in the first place to then facilitate a house being built on a parcel of land or multiple houses. And then there is the actual building construction itself. And one of the challenges that we've got here in the Bega Valley, like many regional areas, particularly coastal regional areas, is that at a point in time in the past, subdivisions occurred under a legislative framework at a point in time, and then down the track, people purchase those already subdivided lots with an expectation there's a housing entitlement there, which often there is. The issue is they're missing that the legislation has changed since the point in time the original subdivision occurred, and the cost of housing development, if it can be achieved, has now far outweighed their expectations on an unconstrained lot. So one of the typical ones that we are facing here in the Bega Valley are issues around biodiversity constraints, bushfire constraints, which are often overlapping on a parcel of land, and certainly issues around working or development within coastal areas, as the Mayor alluded to, is another big one that affects us here. So we have in the past, in trying to determine what our residential growth needs are, looked at our existing lots within the Shire, made some yield assumptions around that, and then time and time again we keep finding that those assumptions from the past have maybe been a bit unrealistic, because the lots we thought could have houses on them no longer can. There's a lot of work in trying to unpick that, and as the Mayor mentioned, we've identified 2 priority urban growth areas in Bega and Wallumbla, and the main reason that council's identified them is they are relatively clear land. The topography is relatively flat compared to everywhere else in the Shire, but there's not much land left like that. And there is servicing implications, in particular in Wallumbla, and infrastructure costs that are going to drive up the cost of the development. But we see us as having no choice here because of the other constraints on the land that's left in the Shire.
So, Mr. McMahon, to those points, in terms of the identification of those lots and those ones with challenges on them, how far back are we talking about in terms of when they were identified for subdivision, subdivided? Are we talking 30 years back? Are we talking 5 years back? How quickly is this changing?
So there are some of them that are several decades back where there were clear development consents provided. Some of them, particularly around our rural village areas, are original Crown portion creations that have existed and cannot be activated. And just as one common example that comes up in the Bega Valley is around Bemboka, which is west of Bega, and there are certain lots in that village that have changed hands that many times, and new purchasers have come along looking to build a house on a lot, but because of the way the lots were originally created, they're unfeasible for people to build a house on. It's potentially possible, but the people that have purchased them have made the assumption they'll be able to afford to build a house, but the constraints make it unaffordable, and then we end up with these dormant lots sitting around the Shire.
So over a period of time, we've had 3, or still got 3 stage developments. We have Boydtown, which is a stage development in the southern part, down towards Eden. We also have Eden Cove at Eden, which is a stage development, and also the Mirador subdivision. So they're all been stage developments over a period. Approved back in the late 80s, early 90s, the whole lot of those under master plan conditions.
Okay. No, I was just going to ask, so in terms of those and the stages, so those stages have been rolling out since the 80s in some of these cases, is that correct?
Yeah, and some have had their own difficulties with finance and other things, and different developers going belly up, so to speak.
Yep.
And the mortgagees taking over. So there's been complications around them all. And some have got sewer and water infrastructure problems that have been unfeasible for them to go ahead with those stages.
So I take it we're getting quite a bit of traffic in terms of what's referred to as the zombie DAs, so to speak. But in these instances, you've got a substantial start on part of the development. Is that correct? And that differentiates it from the zombie DA class, so to speak.
Yeah, if you want to class as zombies, I think they're just stages passes going through, and people are unaware of them. I fully appreciate that from time to time. But yeah, they've been staged and planned originally from the start as different stages. And the release of those land parcels is depending on the developer and when he has the costs and the infrastructure available for him to do. So it becomes an economic statement then as to when they go about.
And in terms of those developments so far, how many properties would be already released as part of the previous stages?
Might have to defer to Ms Harrison, but I don't think we
Might
can
have
give
to
you
take that one on.
But we're talking hundreds, aren't we?
So yeah, at Mirador and Tura Beach, is our largest residential area
Okay.
combined.
Just as a follow-on, do you have an up-to-date yield assumption at the moment for like what's in the pipeline, given they have changed?
Yeah, we would be able to provide, if asked, what our current yield modelling assumes.
Yep.
And that, what I'm alluding to, is based on our land zonings at the moment. So
That would be
we've used
helpful.
we do crude-ish calculations on land area divided by minimum lot sizes with some factoring in of
And
land that needs to be.
it's a flexible situation as well, because we have a planning proposal currently with New South Wales Planning about lot size in certain villages and things like that. That will actually change the yield quite dramatically if it's approved.
Because you're keen to decrease lot sizes
Densification.
to increase, yeah.
Well, we're trying to make it affordable as we can for
Of
people.
course, yeah.
So the more supply we can get into the market, we'll try and solve that problem.
Yeah.
So we are looking at that planning proposal in particular looks at infill development within our existing towns and villages, our ones that are already sewered, so they have access to services in that they'll be the most affordable options for infill.
And just with respect to these developments, are they pre-sold in terms of those upcoming stages, or are they held by developers still?
Yeah, so with the Mirador subdivision, you see a lot of the people in the gallery, actually people who have paid the deposit already and have been waiting since 21, since the blocks first went on the market, to actually try and get a building approval and move forward. But I can't talk about the complications. Our planning department have been working through different acts to actually try and solve that to get a way forward. But Ms Harrison might like to elaborate on that.
Harrison?
So I think as we mentioned earlier, Mirador is has a valid DA. The consent was issued in 1989, but it was a staged development and has been rolled out over time, over many years. This stage, when looking at how that stage is valid, we refer to the original consent, but we have also legally need to look at the tree preservation order that was in place at the time that the DA was developed. And we have looked at as well the need for this stage of the development based on what it actually is, not based on previous stages. So some previous stages had really small lot sizes. This stage has larger lot sizes. So we have taken that into account when we're looking at what vegetation clearing is required for a subdivision work certificate, for example. But from a legal planning perspective, that DA is valid, and we have recently issued a subdivision work certificate to enable that to proceed. My understanding is that there is a federal process as well in terms of biodiversity going on between the developer and the federal government, but that is not part of our assessment process at all. It's quite separate.
I just say that the use and interpretation of the term zombie developments in itself is a bit of a concern from a council perspective. The reason I say that is people perceive a development that still has a lot more to do on it as potentially being defined as a zombie development, but that from our perspective, many of those developments might have actually achieved physical commencement to different degree over a number of decades. So my opinion is you can't pigeonhole them all the same way and assume that some of them should be allowed to go ahead and be done more simply and others shouldn't. So we're sort of trying to unpick that with people in our community to say this development is not the same as that one. Even though they look the same to you, they were given different consents at different points in time, for example, with different tree preservation orders in place at a point in time that then affects what can and can't happen 20 years later, for example. So I think it's a lot more complicated than what might be playing out in the public domain, which in some ways I think is oversimplification of a complex planning framework that has changed over and over again for a number of decades.
But I take it on this, you've got a consent for a subdivision, but then when an individual actually goes to put a home on that property, they have to go through a fresh development application process. So
that's correct.
So there'd be a new consent, and that's where part of the challenge comes, is that right?
Yeah. That's correct at the moment with the ones we're talking about, but there are certainly over decades we've had developments that have come in for subdivisions that then might have had building envelopes as part of the consent that was provided at a point in time, which is a very different type of consent to one that might have been given earlier that didn't have building envelopes. So even the requirements on a person purchasing a block with a building envelope created where it's clear to them what the requirements are going to be when they purchase that to try and lodge a DA to build are very different to those that might have come 5 or 10 years earlier. So again, it's every time you start to think about a scenario, there's always a counter to say, but it's not always going to be like that.
And can I just ask, is there any consideration of council that some of the areas are no longer appropriate because of the fire risk and the egresses and accesses? Does council have a kind of framework in terms of adaptation, and that things may no longer, that were appropriate 30 years ago perhaps, are not? I think the language the government or the current state department has moved to, as I understand it, is intolerable risk. I think we're all going to start having these new phrases put on us. But is that something that is within your planning scope?
Certainly is, and again, we receive guidance from the state government on that, particularly through the RFS and their guidance on planning for bushfire risk. And we regularly have examples here in the Bega Valley where state developed mapping might indicate an area has a high bushfire hazard risk, and practically it gets inspected and everyone involved says this doesn't make sense, and then there's a process that potential developers have to go through to get that reversed. And on the flip side, we will occasionally see developments come to council where the mapping doesn't indicate there's a risk, but when it's inspected there's clearly a risk, and we do the reverse. So we're constantly monitoring the adequacy of the framework in place to see if changes are needed, but we do take the guidance from the experts, which essentially are the RFS on bushfire risk. Bushfire risk is another example of where we get questions sometimes on why we aren't retrospectively applying current standards to previous development. Certainly around the Jura area that we're alluding to here, it's an example of an area where we've now had people that have built houses in previous stages of subdivision saying the 2019 planning for bushfire risk guidelines mean that we're in an unsafe place, council needs to fix it. We're saying, well, we don't retrospectively now apply a new standard to past development. If we were to do that on all development, then it's just not feasible.
And the curveball around that is that most of our villages and towns are totally surrounded by national parks. So whichever ratio we take or whichever bell rating we take, we're going to be very high.
Could I ask just Ms Atkinson and Mr Dixon to comment in terms of maybe elucidate on the issue of the blocks that you had been talking about to the development of the sites that you mentioned?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll give you a little example of what I mean. So we have claimable land which is currently in the hands of Crown lands. It's often in a land use zone, like a recreational zone, or potentially an E zone, and but it may be surrounded by urban parcels of land. and therefore may be capable of being rezoned. But because of the land claim process handled by Crown Lands, that planning is almost at arm's length from that process. And so the claim is determined in the land use zone that it originally occupied. So it's not then handed over, and therefore we are issued with certificate of title, and then we can somehow develop it. We either have to go through a land use rezoning process, which is incredibly difficult, or we have to sit on it and manage it, and of course deal with all of the bushfire and weeds and waste and all of that sort of stuff. So what I'm suggesting, and with the support of the board, is that what we do is we have a process where planning is at the table with Crown Lands, working with land councils to determine what the land could be capable of being rezoned to, and that during the process of the claim being determined, planning can also undertake a review of the land use zone, and with a view that by the time the claim has been granted, that it is in a land use zone that can be activated. And in my initial submission, I indicated that Snowy Monero is a case in point. There are parcels of land there that are not being considered at all through the LEP process because Department of Planning appear to be blind to a land claim on foot. And so therefore they perceive that land as remaining in the status in which it is when they're looking at initially. So they see a parcel of Crown land that is no longer going to be used for whatever original purpose it had, but they don't think about what it might be capable of being used for, and therefore you'll have if you had a look at the Special Activation Precinct in Jindabyne or any of that area around those towns that are under review by the LEP, you will see that the land surrounding it is being reviewed and considered for development by virtue of land use zone changes, but you'll see that donut phenomena where you see the pockets of Crown land being ignored. If the two departments were working together in this process and that planning was not blind to what is on foot as a claim, that they could see the value potentially in working with Aboriginal organisations such as ours. You imagine land councils across New South Wales, the number of claims that are currently on foot, and of those claims, the number that are claimable, and imagine activating them along with other land that you're trying to release to deal with the housing issue, and that Aboriginal organisations then become part of the conversation. They are a player, and they therefore can contribute to looking at adaptable housing that can meet climate change, the climate change needs, I suppose. And it also empowers Aboriginal people to make those decisions. At the moment, I have land claims that are granted and that become a liability because until we can activate them, I have to pay for weed, pest, dumping, fencing, bushfire mitigation, all of that sort of stuff. And so that's where I'm saying that bring us to the table, allow us to be part of the conversation and not a bystander, and not continue to have Aboriginal people in substandard housing as we move towards a changing climate. Instead, allow Aboriginal organisations and Aboriginal people to be part of the housing conversation.
Can I just, on that, can I ask you, Ms Atkinson, what your view would be when the claim, so the claim and there is likely to be a successful claim and therefore grant, if that land is highly constrained land and of very significant biodiversity value. Have you considered, or I'd like to know your thoughts, that at that point there should be consideration with Crown lands, planning, etc., that alternative lands for activation could be provided, like if there was other...
So you could have a trade-off. But also, let me just explain the process. When a claim is granted, and regardless of the land use zone, if it is capable of being activated, the process that I, as the CEO of the organisation, have to take is to go to the board, get the consent of the board to start a process of doing something about that land, and it goes then to the membership. So it may be that even if it's within a land use zone that might be compatible with development, if there are other factors, or if there are there are significant financial impediments, it might be that that particular parcel of land is not considered, or it's considered for other purposes. The point is, of all of the claimable lots across the state, there would be a portion of that land, and I can demonstrate that, that is not only claimable, but also that it is capable of being developed almost immediately if it were in a land use zone that enables that activity. In other words, that activation, because it is not heavily forested. It might be. It may have been originally deemed to be a bit of a playground, but because of the way there's been a change in that community over generations, that little parcel of land is just basically a dead piece in amongst an urban area that is not suitable for parkland or a playground any further. Well, why not have that land be rezoned to be compatible with the land around it, and therefore activate it so Aboriginal people can make a choice about what they want to do with it? And that might be, I can't speak for you, David, but it might be that you want to own it. You want to own it and then develop it. You might want to put a house on it. You might not want to put a house on it. Is that true?
Yeah, so we can have some real power to be able to plan and to make decisions within our community. Land Rights Act has been there since 1983, and I was born here. My family go back to first contact in this township. We've still to see the benefits of the land that we have to our community, and so that we can build resources within our community, so we can adapt, so we can build resilience for climate change catastrophe. I'd seen that in the 2019-2020 bushfires down here, where the Aboriginal community were very vulnerable. Even myself, I had nowhere to go with my partner and my children. We come in, it was all overcrowded in the evacuation zones, and it was all overcrowded, and it caused a lot of how can I put it, between families, and the stress that was put on family relationships. And it was very, very terrifying. It's traumatising just talking about it now. But I think within our land, I think there's a gap there that needs to be filled. And support what Leanne is saying, because I don't think this has been looked at. And I think that maybe the Parliament and our leaders and local government and those, who this is of interest to should be looking at this as well, and there should be a further investigation into what that gap is. Why, since 1983, have we not seen the benefits of our assets through not being able to be a party to the planning? And why are we overlooked in the rezoning when zoning goes on around our parcels of land? If that was I know we're speaking about Mirador. Mirador is a built-up area. We have parcels of land in Mirador. It's the same thing. It's been built up around our parcels of land. If we had access to resources, we would be a much more resilient community, and to be able to have the ability to be able to resolve our own social issues, rather than just being reliant upon government funding.
And do you, Mr. Dixon, does the Land Council work with the council? Do you have a relationship where you can discuss the claims and the council-owned or managed Crown lands, or?
Yeah, we do.
We've got the BEM, which is the Bega Eden Merriman's MOU between us and the council. The difficulty is, and I don't want to speak for council, except that often this is not a local government issue to solve. The issue around this land activation is at that state level, where planning has not got a seat at the table through whatever means to be able to have visibility of what land is, what claim is on foot, and I mean, this is not a Treasury impost. If you have a couple of planning department people in with the claims assessment team, looking at high value opportunities within each region, there could be land that could be activated. And as David says, that it empowers Aboriginal people, but it's actually a win-win for everybody, because you activate land for housing, everybody gains, firstly. And secondly, that because we're not talking about a huge Treasury impost, the only barrier is that within the various government departments that are not participating in this as in a whole of government, using a whole of government approach.
We'll just get the CEO to explain
can I
that.
add to that? Leanne's just made a key point that I wanted to raise in this, the issue of either conflicting or duplicative legislation in place that is stopping what seem like really good solutions from happening. And the point Leanne hasn't quite made that relates back to the question you asked about what if it's high value environmental land, is there a way to deal with that? At the moment, if a parcel of Crown land within our shire that's under claim has a reserved purpose of environmental conservation, or if it is zoned under our LEP for environmental conservation, it means that it won't be eligible to be used within the biodiversity offset market as an economic way to get a return for a land council if that land was granted to them, to then reinvest back in what you were alluding to before, which is alternate land to do the development on. So it's almost like a double whack that the land councils are getting. Most of the land in our shire that is Crown land, that is under claim, at least large percentages of it, are high biodiversity value or high bushfire risk, which are going to be really hard to ever activate. But the land councils, when they're granted, can't economically do anything with the land. It's like Leanne said, a liability, because the protection is already there, but it still needs management, but with no financial resource to do it. Whereas if I'm a private property owner at the moment and I've got a parcel of land that doesn't have that either environmental conservation zoning over the top of it, then I can put it into the biodiversity offset market, get a financial return and go reinvest those funds. So in my opinion, the land council is a double disadvantage compared to non-government owned landowners because of the rules.
And is your understanding the Aboriginal Land SEP doesn't assist with that at all?
I don't believe it does, no.
No, I don't think it does either.
And so we find ourselves in a state of conflict, because what happens is the council is obliged to remind us when we need to manage land. But
it's a very nice diplomatic way of putting it.
Not our rules.
But I mean, and I was very naive when I first got this role, that I thought that when land was handed back, that with it might be a little bit of funding to help us remediate it if there was sediment control issues or other issues that were on the land prior to our accessing it. But no, Crown Lands tells us that we get it in the condition that it's in, and that it's our responsibility to fence it, to manage it, to remediate it, and that if we want any assistance in doing that, we could potentially apply for a grant. And when you are an organisation that is seen through a deficit lens by government and forced into a grant dependency sort of situation, as opposed to looked at through a strengths-based model, then you can't ever quite get ahead. But I honestly see there are clear ways forward, and it's just about looking at Aboriginal organisations through that strengths-based lens and not continuing just to hand over cash and continuing to feed that dependency. So that goes back to that land issue. If land claims are handed over with value that's tradable value, then Aboriginal people can make decisions about what you want to do with it and make decisions about whether you develop it or not.
Ms Munro.
Thank you. Do you have an idea of how large these parcels of land are that you're managing at the moment, and also that you might potentially manage depending on how land claims are determined?
I actually have a very concise GIS map, and I have identified every single parcel of land, both under claim and currently in our hands. And through that process, I'm getting a dashboard built at the moment. I will be able to switch on and off layers, so we will very easily be able to work out what is possible. But I've both tried to work with Bega Valley and Snowy Monera.
Would you be able to provide the square meterage or square kilometre size of each of those?
100%. I could take that on notice, and with a request, I could provide whatever you need as a case study, and I can also give you examples in and around the Snowy where we have a slightly different set of circumstances but the same opportunities, and I can identify exactly where those claims are and what the size of those claims are and what is going on around that land, so you can see what could be possible.
That would be excellent if you can take them on notice. Thank you very much.
And the committee needs to be, we actually have 3 land councils within the Bega Valley Shire.
Yes, yep.
And just briefly, one, in the ballpark, how many claims do you currently have in place that are under consideration?
It would be in the hundreds.
Yep. And I imagine they've been there for a very long period of time as well.
So in the 40 years of the Land Rights Act being in effect, my understanding from recent advice from Aboriginal Affairs was, or it might have been Department of Crown Lands, was that something like 4,000 over 40 years have been determined, and there is a backlog of in the...
Over 200,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have gone from 6 staff to now something like 20 to work on them. But you're talking about an organisation that is siloed, so it is Crown Lands is working in isolation on those parcels with no sight of what could be possible.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I think our time has come where I know...
Can I just ask
so absolutely.
more?
I was saying
Sorry.
if there's final comments, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fitzpatrick, I was curious about the social licence that you have at the moment to build more houses. Do you feel like there's a fairly comfortable level of support to increase dwelling capacity?
We've had a housing crisis since even probably prior to the bushfires. It's just been exacerbated, and it continues to get worse. We have a homeless situation and low social housing, but also our affordable housing. Our land prices have gone up over 100%. The RG's valuations alone were all rateable increases of over 100% in valuations. So unless we get more supply into the market, we're still going to have that problem, and we need to free up these lots. We've got very, very limited greenfield space within the Shire, and we will come across more and more of these where there will be biodiversity offsets and biodiversity problems that will stifle our development to actually provide housing for our residents to actually grow the Shire.
Thank you.
Could I ask just one, just to take on notice to Ms Atkinson and Mr Dixon, could you take on notice supplying the committee with any correspondence you may have with any government agency where you've sought to rectify this matter and the responses you've received? And if you don't have that, what would be specifically the responses that you would have liked to have received to such? I'm trying to zero in on what specific requests that you'd be making of whoever is in government at whatever time that may help overcome this problem.
I have more than 12 months worth of correspondence and various meeting file notes, and hence why I'm developing our own GIS tool. So I'm more than happy, if it helps the committee, to provide a bit of a snapshot of what actions we have tried to take ourselves to move this ahead, and what roadblocks we've had along the way, and why we had to find ourselves here asking for support of the committee.
Chair, I think I'd certainly appreciate it if that could happen.
Yeah.
And if I can just add one on notice as well as we're going through the round of on notice. In terms of the...
We're
the
a demanding mob.
Yeah.
Sorry.
In terms of the master planned communities you were talking about, how many, if you could take on notice, how many residential lots are sort of in the pipeline for those within the Bega Valley Shire would be appreciated as well.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, and just like to reinforce that the state has been supportive in recent times in providing the funding we need to actually do that strategic planning work. And if there's one thing we would ask the state to continue to do, it's provide the resources to get the framework in place for the development to occur, because that's been a barrier in the past for us, and our council certainly appreciates that support.
Can I just ask finally, the notion, I realise that we, particularly you, Councillor Fitzpatrick, the Mayor, Mr Mayor, the concept that biodiversity is this problem, what do you see? Are you suggesting therefore that we have to get rid of biodiversity? Is that, I'm kind of contemplating
No,
now.
not at all. There's ways to work through it that allows partial clearing, and then partial, we need to keep more trees. We realise that. We need the shade. We've got a heating environment, so we need to be that. We need to work with it. But at the present time, we just don't have land available. So, and that's available for subdivision and releasing to bring our house prices down to a level that our young people can afford to build. Already here we've got 31 people who have been sitting since 2021 with a deposit paid. They can't move in their life. They're renting. They're out renting and holding up a rent market. We need them cleared off the rent market so they can move on. But we need to provide them property. If it's not these properties, there needs to be an urgent action to actually have an offset where the developer can actually, and these people can purchase similar type land of similar value to what they've purchased at the present time.
And are these specific, sorry, and I may have missed this earlier, but are they these specific 31, are these the coastal development you were referring to?
Yeah, the Mirador development. Most of them are in the room, or some of them are in the room here today, because they've been waiting for so long, just waiting for a developer and a planning outcome to actually go ahead. They'd love to get in and lodge a building application and a DA application, but they're hamstrung at the present time.
Thank you. And sorry, just one final one. I know we are out of time. This is what happens when you wait to ask your questions, you forget them. In terms of the mix of housing, is that something that, I know you were talking about infill to existing housing, what are the sort of different densities and mix of housing? Where are you at the moment in terms of looking into that as an issue?
Yeah, so we have an affordable housing strategy that did look at that. What style or size of development do we need for our community and for growth into the future? And at the moment we have a mismatch between our housing stock and what the community needs. So we do need smaller dwellings.
Yeah.
And that's why things like infill are really important for a number of reasons. One, it's a bit easier when we're looking at biodiversity and things, but it's actually the type of housing stock that our community needs. Ageing population, more single or smaller couple families. And at the moment, a lot of those people are currently living in larger properties that our families need. So they are often in the rental market or looking for properties, but we don't have the smaller dwellings for people to shift to free up some of those larger ones.
I think that's an issue across all of regional New South Wales at the moment, and we're kind of trying to find it. And just finally, do you have you an identifiable issue in terms of housing with the short-term rental accommodation issue? Is that taking up housing that should potentially be available?
The answer to that is yes. It is highly topical in our community at the moment. The extent of the actual issue and what the potential solutions are is something that our council is very interested in and watching closely, and we've been monitoring what's been happening on the North Coast to see whether what's been occurring there is something that might make a difference here. We've also been considering whether we do look at some of the sort of broader socio-economic study work that needs to be done to understand the impacts if change is made. We would love it if the state actually stepped up and did that work, and it wasn't up to individual local government areas to look at what the impact on things like tourism is. So for us, the tourism sector is the largest employer within our community, both probably indirectly, particularly through hospitality and retail. So the numbers are really important to us. So the last thing we want to do is prevent short-term accommodation supply that means our local economy suffers, but at the same time we've got the housing issue. Yeah. So we don't know enough yet about what the impact would be of a change. So we'd love the state to pick that up and drive that sort of research better.
And we are very grateful to have seen the discussion paper looking at that issue, and we did contribute to that. And we are very keen for that to be fast-tracked if at all possible. And like Anthony said, it's one thing we're really keen on looking at it is at that state level, but obviously the recognition as well that there needs to be localised solutions, and a one-size-fits-all when you look at STRA is not necessarily going to apply across the state or even potentially within a shire. So our STRA split between our different towns and villages is very different if it's a rural village or if it's a coastal village.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you very much for your time and your evidence, and the Secretariat will be in contact with you about matters taken on notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for being here today, and welcome. So I ask you if you would please, each witness, starting from my left with you, Ms McNamara, if you could please state your name, position, title, and swear either an oath or an affirmation.
Sure. I'm Gillian McNamara, a committee member of Friends of Coiler, and I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Nick Summers, or Nicholas Summers. I'm the convener of the Friends of Coiler Inc. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Sam Tierney, I'm Principal Solicitor at Ken Cush & Associates, and I have acted on behalf of the Friends of Coiler, and I act on behalf of Friends of Crunch. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And would any of you like to start by making an opening statement?
You would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yes, I'll do that. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to have a bit of a spiel here. Secondly, I'd like to pay my respects to traditional owners of this land. Emotionally, I'm torn at the moment because on one side I'm very proud to represent the Friends of Coiler, which is a small group of people that are very committed to trying to preserve the environment of Lake Coiler and Churros Head and the surrounding wetlands and the associated environment. So I'm very proud, but on the other hand, I'm really quite sad today. This morning I went to see the site that we've been opposing, the development that we've been opposing, and the development comes in two parcels. And one of those parcels, the bulk of it, about 8 hectares, has been flattened, and the dirt has been piled up into mountains of dirt. That was only probably a month ago or 2 months ago. That was like a paddock with trees in it. It wasn't great high quality land, but it was the home for 70 kangaroos, numerous birds, echidnas, lots of different reptiles, very diverse for what doesn't look like great land. It's surprising. And the reason why it's so diverse, and if I can just quickly show you this map, you'll see that the two parcels of land which are in the yellowy colour there, if I can just...
Yeah, thank you.
If you take that around, the big parcel of land is about 8 hectares, 8.5 hectares. The little parcel of land is about 1.5 hectares. The little parcel hasn't been touched as yet, and we're still hopeful that maybe, just maybe, that won't be developed. But they're very different parcels. So the big parcel, which has been hammered really hard and is now just flat dirt, apart from mountains of dirt, that's been done in 2 months, and they're going at it full, hammer and tongs. And we've tried to save that land, but it seems like, even though we can mount really good arguments for why this is important, why this is really important land, because it butts against the wetland. It's right on it. It's low-lying land. It's fire-prone land. It's got everything, when I read through the terms of reference, if you look at number A, we fit all of those. It's fire and flood prone, and that is acknowledged. So that bit has been destroyed. And, they've done an AHIP survey, they've looked into the Aboriginal heritage of that piece of land, and they've come up with thousands of artefacts. Apparently those artefacts will be boxed and at some stage reburied. So apparently that doesn't matter. Now this piece of land is the beginnings of the Binji Dreaming Track, which starts at Churros and goes all the way up the coast to Binji, and it's an advertised and signposted track that people walk along. But the very beginning of it has been bulldozed. Now, where this land, part of the land is actually considered flood prone, but all that land next to it, that wetlands that are next to it where the creek comes in, that's all flood prone. According to the plans of the developer, they're going to whack a road across the top of that creek to join the two sections up. The other section is at the bottom of the golf club in Churros, and that section has groves of casuarina trees, all of which are meant to be chopped down and turned into housing. Now, we now know that some of those groves were burial grounds for Aboriginal people for the last 10,000 years. that is a common thing they did at Coiler Lake, was bury their people next to casuarina groves. And there's casuarina groves all along the foreshore there. So there's 3 EECs abutting these 2 bits of land and in fact encroaching onto these 2 bits of land. There's swamp oak forest, there's grasslands, and there's wetlands. There's seagrass and there's wetlands. And there's also remnants of rainforest. There's some beautiful fig trees and stuff. Apparently those remnants aren't big enough to call rainforest, even though they look like rainforest to me. Now, for about 8 years, I worked in all those adjacent areas, so I know the area really well. I worked there as a bush regenerator. Council paid our team to weed and plant all along that foreshore. And paid a lot of money out to have that all done, and it's looking really beautiful. You can imagine my disappointment when the big sort of buffer zone between the housing and these beautiful wetlands and foreshores has been removed, and it's now just bare earth, and it's going to be 60 or so houses on that section. Now, one of our objections was this is a 1984 DA. So-called zombie development, some people call it land banking. 1984, they were operating under 1979 environmental law. Things have changed since 1984. First of all, this cleared block was covered with 40-year-old trees and you know, lots and lots of stuff growing on it from that 40 years because it was originally cleared. But council apparently consider it still cleared, even though it had trees on it. They're all gone now, but it had multiple trees on it and habitat. So that's considered cleared because once, 40 years ago, it was cleared. Under the old environmental guidelines, there is no EIS done for this development. We were requesting that, but apparently you don't have to have that. What happened was in 2021, I think it was, finally it got activated and the new developers, the new owners asked for a modification. And that modification was to go from 60 houses plus 1 commercial development to 72 houses. The block sizes got smaller, of course. And we argued that that was a substantial change to the development. You know, it was an extra 20% more housing for stars, 20% more pollution, 20% more runoff, 20% more dogs and cats, 20% more people. In a shire, Eurobodalla Shire, and in an area, Churros, there's already pretty stretched for services. You know, we're already kind of crowded. There wasn't enough room in our evacuation centres for even a quarter of our population. Not even a quarter of our population could be actually evacuated to somewhere safe. And in fact, the evacuation centre was only enough for 200 people, not 2,000. And it was only because the club donated another 200 spaces that they got it up in numbers. So, and Churros has one road in and out. And when the fires were approaching from every angle, it was pretty scary. And, you know, we had no power, no communications for 2 weeks. But nevertheless, this little section in between the 2 lots is really important to us because it's a little wetland and it's got amazing bird life and amazing fish and crustaceans and all sorts of things. There's a unique crustacean that lives just in that one lake, which is an opening and closing natural lake, one of the last on the New South Wales coastline. So we consider this area really important. The type of housing they want to build is boutique housing. So we're not talking about affordable housing here. We're talking about millionaires buying $1 million homes or more. So it's posh housing. So basically, you know, my disappointment is that they flattened that big section, that every attempt we've made to try and get some common sense into this has been rejected, and we've made many attempts, has been rejected because apparently it's legal. It may be legal, but to my way of thinking, it's not right. It's actually stupid. Because there's plenty of land near Churros, plenty of damaged farmland that would be perfectly good for housing. In fact, would probably be better considering that this is very low lying. Some of the blocks are only 3 metres above sea level.
Can I just interrupt, Nick? We've got a map there with the, you might like to have a look at that. That's the flood prone.
That's the flood plan,
And
and you
that's-
can see the blocks there. And you can see
That's
that
actually-
that's the wetland. When it rains, it goes a bit bigger. When the river's high, it goes a bit bigger, and then it contracts and it breathes.
And it's
the
also-
wetland breathes.
Sorry to interrupt. It's also a fairly conservative estimate of flood levels. I don't think it's based on the most recent figures from New South Wales.
Yeah, when we
So-
looked into it, Adapt New South Wales figures only go down as far as I think it's Nowra.
Yeah.
Eurobodalla Shire hasn't been included in the new figures. Council uses the old figures, and even those Adapt New South Wales figures are the most conservative figures for sea level rise. So if they're wrong, and it's actually going to be more than what they say, this is obviously going to be a serious issue. Now, council can spend its money building seawalls in 20 years' time to stop these blocks being flooded. But of course, that's not a good environmental option. The other thing is that I'm really concerned about these houses being built right next to the casuarina groves, which will, apparently is going to happen. But as soon as there's somebody living in a house there, they're going to be complaining about those casuarinas because they're, fire prone, highly fire prone. And then it's not council gets to decide that, it's the RFS. And they make a decision purely based on going in later and going, oh yeah, that's too close to our house, so we can chop those trees down. Oh, by the way, it'll improve your view by a few $100,000 as well. That's just a little bonus of it, but it's all because of the fire prone. Now, we're trying to say to council, don't build that bottom row of houses next to those casuarinas because people will want those casuarinas gone, because it will be a fire hazard. But of course, council says, well, that's not up to us, that's up to the RFS. We have approached state government, local government, federal government on numerous occasions. We've done numerous submissions. We've attempted legal action. We've attempted protest action. We've done as much as we could. We're a little hodgepodge group of volunteers. We're not being paid to do this, and we have no vested interest in this. None of us live next to it. None of us want to buy land there or anything. We're just trying to say, this is environmental madness, and isn't it time we changed this stuff, 1984, it was probably a stupid idea then, but it's an even worse idea now. Things have changed since then. We now know a lot more about environment, about habitat, about wetlands and their importance. Wetlands are threatened worldwide because of development. Housing development is the biggest threat to wetlands. Here we have this little mini wetland, a beautiful little wetland that looks fabulous after rain, but not so good when it's been drought for a couple of years. This little mini wetland is really important. There are birds that use that wetland, that come to that wetland every year from places as far away as North America. Alaska. This is a crucial, critical little bit of land, and whilst it doesn't look like much to the untrained eye, the ones of us that have got a bit of environmental background, a bit of environmental knowledge, can see what a gem it is, what a beautiful part of Churros it is, and to build a development on both sides of this little wetland, both of which actually encroach the wetland actually goes on to the development in both corners, and to trash this Aboriginal heritage of the Bingy Dreaming Track, to me just seems like madness. And the planning system has failed us, and we've tried to jump through all the hoops. We've been given misinformation by various different government authorities. We've been given what I call the royal runaround. This department can't help us, so go and see that department. That department doesn't know about it, so you better see your state department. That department says, oh no, it belongs to the first department, and round the circle you go. To me, just as an average punter, this system is not working for what it's meant to be doing, which is providing affordable, quality housing for people in a regional area and respecting the environment at the same time. What we're seeing is a cash grab. A big developer comes in, buys up this old DA that they found sneaking around the back room somewhere, splashed a bit of money around, and all of a sudden they're going to make millions out of it. And that's the whole reason for it. We're saying we'd rather it wasn't being done there. And if they want to do some development, how about they do a bit of a deal with council and do a land swap and build some affordable housing, not multi-million-dollar places, build some affordable housing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. On one hand, I'm very proud to be here, and on the other hand, I'm very, very sad about what's going on.
Thank you,
Gillian.
Summers. Yeah, please, anyone else wanted to make a statement before we go into questions?
Yeah, I think for me, it's extremely hard to come out of this process without feeling incredibly cynical. 3 levels of government. I had this really naive idea that we paid local councillors, state government, federal government. We actually employ you guys, and what do we get out of this? I was hoping for a bit of transparency, a bit of information to come our way when we asked for it, even some consideration of the, 93 objections to the modification of the consent in 2020.
97 objections, 3 in favour.
We have been just dealing with obfuscation. I don't know, sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's incompetence or something more. Incorrect information, we've been given, I mean, this is all in the submission, but we've been given incorrect information about whether it's legal or not to revoke a consent. A person from the planning department in the Shire Council told us that they could not legally revoke a consent. Apparently they hadn't read the Act that states that you can. So, it's been an extremely trying process. It's very sad to see a great pile of mud where there used to be trees. It was particularly sad to watch them clearing the site during the nesting season, when presumably quite a lot of nestlings went into the mulcher. It's just horrific. And, some people have said, well, you're being NIMBYs. It's not actually my backyard. It belongs to the non-human animals that have no voice and they have no choice. They can't move somewhere else because their mud flats are just being built on, and they can't come along here and say, hey guys, what are you doing?
The other, just briefly, the other point I'd like to make is that we're, amongst our team are citizen scientists, ecologists, people that are really interested in the environment, but most of us by no means are experts. We've had to learn about SEPs, about GIPPers, about, what are the other ones?
The EPBC Act that we're still waiting to hear
The EPBC Act, which we haven't had any reply to after months and months of asking for answers. When are you going to make a determination? Keep an eye on the website. We check it every day. It's just, this slow process. LEPs, numerous different acronyms for all these different processes that we've had to find out about. Now, it shouldn't be our job to do that. Shouldn't somebody be being paid to point out to council, to government, to developers, to people involved, to banks, to people involved in all this sort of stuff, to insurance companies? Shouldn't there be somebody that's actually paid to look into this stuff? All we initially asked for was an EIS. That's what we wanted, an environmental impact statement. In the end, we commissioned our own, which was quite damning.
I should give you that. Would somebody like to pick that up from us? We've got 3 copies of it.
It's a desktop one. It wasn't done actually on site completely, to the highest standard, because we couldn't afford to pay for something like that. But shouldn't there be a system where somebody else is actually checking these things out and saying, no, that's not good enough? In 2024, 1984 ideas have reached their use-by date. It's called a zombie development. Well, we happen to be in touch with maybe 20 other groups up and down the coast that have different conditions, slightly different legal situations, different councils, but they've got the same problem. They're seeing beautiful areas being decimated for the quick buck. And that's what we're objecting to. And we need your help, because for 3 years, we've been working on this. We're all exhausted and we're all a lot more informed, but we seem to be getting nowhere. Everybody keeps saying, no, you haven't got a chance, you haven't got a case, you haven't got this, you haven't got that. Well, why should it be up to us, a little group of concerned people? But if we don't do it, who's going to do it? You know, and I would suggest government should be doing this.
Thank you. Mr. Tierney, did you want to?
I think in the interest of brevity, I'll just leave that there and proceed to your questions. I would, just at the start, like to thank you for coming all the way down here. I appreciate on the far south coast quite often, as is the way, living this far from Sydney, that it's difficult to get here, as you've experienced this morning. So we do appreciate the effort, but the issues that we face on the south coast are as real as any in Rozelle or wherever in Sydney these things might be happening. But it is important to us as a community that you have come here to actually speak to the people, so thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask, so we heard earlier the Mayor and the council staff, and they, they seem to be of that view that it's very, that these areas should be developed. That's what it sounds like, that they are saying for various reasons, that these are housing blocks and we need housing blocks. I'm just wondering if how do you reconcile that?
Mm-hmm.
I hear what you're saying, but yeah.
Well, I think depending on which particular housing blocks we're talking about, this is just a really stupid place to build. I mean, if you want to build affordable housing, it should be close to services. We've got one road in, one road out, no public transport, part-time medical centre. Since the fires, the RFS have had their resources increased. We still don't have a bushfire haven. We don't have a heatwave haven. I mean, the fires, we were so lucky that they passed us by and we didn't burn. But it was a horrendous time with no communication, the local shop beginning to run out of food, and you couldn't get out to the highway. I mean, there's areas of bush on the way out from Churros to the main road. It would have been pointless going out anyway because the whole area was just about it was locked down. So sure, I'm totally in favour of affordable housing. I noticed that the developer's actually changed his website now and is calling it something different, but it was being advertised as a boutique development with ocean views and various other expressions that indicate, as Nick has said, very, very expensive housing blocks. Our area is quite a low socioeconomic area. The people who need housing can't afford those blocks. There are people who are looking for rentals and they can't find them. Our town has, I'm not even sure what the percentage is, I can certainly find out, but a high proportion of them are holiday homes. The Mayor did attempt to get more houses available for rental by writing to all the people who owned holiday homes, and I think he got an extra 80 houses available for rental. But I mean, building mansions on the edge of a lake is doing absolutely nothing to fix the affordable housing problem. Housing could be built on the outskirts of Maruya and Narooma, where you can walk to shops or cycle to shops and to a doctor's surgery. We've got virtually nothing where we are, and yet we're encouraging an extra 72 householders.
Yeah, and if I could just make the point that in 2018 we had a housing shortage, and then we had the bushfires, and we lost 1,000 houses in the Eurobodalla Shire, mostly up at Batemans, but 1,000 houses. There have been people living at the caravan park. It was closed for 2 years because it was full of people that were living there in tents and caravans because they'd had their houses burnt down. I personally know a dozen people that had their houses burnt down. I lost a lot of my storage because it was burnt down. So it's affected all of us. We already had a housing shortage. Now they're planning on building a hospital at Maruya, and they're going to build 1,000 houses. Those 1,000 houses that they're going to build at Maruya, if and when they do it, and if and when they do the hospital, it's all sort of been mooted. Those 1,000 houses will only cover the new people coming into the Shire to start that hospital. They won't add to our housing supply. And they certainly, and this development won't add to our housing supply, except to the very top end of our housing supply. We already have quite a lot of luxury houses and you know, sort of mansions. What we don't have much of is middle and lower level of housing. So we already had the problem. The fires made it worse and COVID just made it worse. And now it seems like it's business as usual.
Senator, can I just speak to the Mirador development and your question on that? The Mayor mentions the 31 blocks that are proposed in that stage of the development. I think it's important that that is put in the context of exactly what Nick and Gillian have just told you. We're talking about 31 to 2,000 plus square metre blocks. These are not affordable housing solutions. These are blocks which were approved back in 1989, and they are blocks which were approved with the environmental standards and the planning standards, importantly, such as they were 30 plus years ago. The suggestion that those 31 houses are necessary for addressing the housing crisis in this part of the world is, with all due respect, misleading. It is clear from a review of the Council's own housing plans extending out to 2030 that these 31 blocks in Mirador are not even considered as part of their proposed plan to take this forward to 2030. In that respect, it has to be kept in mind precisely what we're dealing with when we talk about these types of developments. It is not as simple as saying this adds more housing stock to the market, therefore it's a good idea because it addresses affordability. To approach it in that way means that anything should go on that rationale, and that's clearly not the case. It has to also be borne in mind that each of these sites must be considered on its own merits, and I'm talking not just about biodiversity necessarily, but affordability, access to services, bushfire risk, Aboriginal heritage impacts. All of these things need to be factored in. The problem with these consents at their absolute heart is we're dealing with something that was assessed 30 plus years ago, and automatically that means approvals being given for something which climate change, I think, was not even a concept discussed, let alone in existence back in 1989. So there's been no consideration of that as an issue. Secondly, the nature of these communities has changed, and it's very, very important that it's borne in mind that when these consents are given 30 plus years ago, we're dealing with a community that looks very different to what it did in 1989. And in that respect, certainly for the Mirador development, I can say, because I was living here in 89, the community as it was then is not the community that lives here now. So these are the factors that are currently not being considered and talked about as to why these developments are no longer appropriate. The other issue which we've seen, and I'm very concerned to hear from the CEO today that they're aware of a bushfire issue in the Mirador development, for example, is that, as with the Churros Lake developments, we're talking about a development which was approved allowing one access road in and out. That road in the Mirador setting is bounded by, on the southern side, Crown land, and on the northern side, land held by the local Aboriginal Council. That is forested land. That is heavily forested land, and that is land that, if a bushfire occurred in that space, would leave the residents on this already existing development stuck in a situation where the access road out is not viable. There is an alternative road down into Merimbula, which I understand at the moment is currently gated. I don't know whether council is looking at that as an option going forward, but these are just examples of the types of issues that the community has identified that it seems that the council is wringing its hands and saying it's not willing to exercise its powers under the Environmental Planning Act to actually revoke, modify or vary these types of consents. In that respect, it seems to me that the underlying issue in all of this, let's get real about it, is money. We have, in this area anyway, a local council who is financially in a very difficult position. There's been substantial rate increases in the last several years to try and address some of those financial difficulties. But at the end of the day, because of the way the Planning Act operates at the moment, if these consents are modified, varied or revoked entirely, it then immediately opens up the decision-making authority to be liable to compensation being payable to a developer at the back end of this. The difficulty in that, obviously, is that you then have a local council having to pick up the tab for a developer who has valuable property rights and valuable rights where, in some cases, such as the Churros case, there'd actually been substantial work done, put in a sewerage system already back in the late 80s. So it seems to me that one of the issues that this committee should look at very closely is how do you address that particular exposure, and how do you ensure that local councils aren't left holding the baby, as it were, when it comes to acting on the community's wishes to deal with these decades-old consents. So something I would flag very much for the committee to look at. I think it's an important consideration.
On that, we had, we've questioned, this committee questioned the Minister for Planning in budget estimates about what does it count, because there's councils up and down the coast that have actually said this development is dangerous, it's no longer a good development, and they've defended that position in a court and lost, and the Minister has said, well, they have the power to revoke it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as you say, no council has had that capacity or courage to exercise that power, because we don't know what it would look like. Nobody's ever done that in law in New South Wales lightly, so yeah, it's...
And in our case, our council being a different one from
Yes.
Bega, Eurobodalla Shire Council, I think they're currently operating with an $11 million deficit. They've just managed to pull it back from 14 million. Mm. And Mr McCloy of the McCloy Group spent 13.2 million on the site and has been spending apparently 20,000 a day on the work that's being done there now. So you'd be asking a council with a minus 11 million in the bank to compensate a developer, presumably for more than 13.2 million.
So can I just ask, and my colleagues have got questions too, can I just ask, in terms of Churros, mm-hmm. is it your proposition or vision there that because of the constraints, that is an area that has reached its maximum development capacity, for all of the constraints? Is that, or is it just this specific site, or, I'm just curious as to what...
Well, I mean, it's done and dusted now, so we'll see what happens when the 72 houses are there.
Yeah.
I think there's probably room for a few more houses, but that depends also on other resources. I know that one of the local organisations, the South Coast Health and Safety Alliance, are looking at grants to build bushfire havens. Mm. So that's finding money from goodness knows where, grants. And they've been looking at putting in some bushfire havens. Council doesn't have the money to do that and is not interested in doing it. But as Nick said before, when we had the fires, there was room for a very small number of people in the hastily accessed golf club. We couldn't all fit in there. The other safety places were a field and I think a tennis court or something. Anyway, I mean, if you're going to add housing, see, this is what to me is completely mad about this system. A developer is going to make millions and walk away, and then a cash-strapped council is going to hear ratepayers saying, well, where are we meant to go the next time there's a fire? And where are we meant to go the next time there's a flood? Well, nowhere. There is nowhere. And so where does the money come from to provide the infrastructure that isn't there for these residents?
Yeah, and if I could just point out that, there may well be, I think Churros is pretty much at full capacity now, and given that it's a unique place which has a large parcel of community land which was donated to the Churros community. It's actually owned by the Churros community, not by council. This land was donated to the Churros community back in the 40s by the original developer, who did a lot of work on that bit of land. And so that's why we have some unique patches of forest, of rainforest in Churros, Chatham Park and Hector McWilliam Park, examples of that, but also along some of the foreshore of Churros Lake. That is community land. And as you drive into Churros, you've got the big views, it's cattle grazing land. That is all community land. So, and the community is very proud of that land and wants to protect that land, and it is leased to a cattle grazer to keep the grass down. At different stages over the years, they've tried to develop that land, but the community has always said no to that. So, and I'm in favour of leaving that land as it is. But there is that land there. But there's also other little bits and pieces of land where you could probably find 72 houses if you had to compensate.
But just a certain amount of
Whereabouts
income.
Yeah, I was going to say,
is that?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Whereabouts is that? I heard you mention that before, sort of alternative housing areas. Where, just like physically located, whereabouts are you thinking?
Well, from my way of thinking, and this is just me talking personally, not representing Friends of Koila, because there could be some argument about this. I think that the land that is north of the tennis courts, there's a big block there that would take about probably 40 or 50 houses. There's another block actually just near that to the south of the tennis courts, which could take, these are just grass blocks. They don't have any trees on them or anything, and they're right on the main drag, so they just would become part of the normal suburb of Churros, those bits. But they're certainly not flood prone.
But the other thing about all of that, as I said before, is that that's lovely if we've got some additional infrastructures to support these houses. The absolutely sensible thing to do, bearing in mind climate change, if we want to go to a large shop, 20-kilometre drive to Maruya, far more sensible to be building on the outskirts of Maruya and providing accommodation there, which is within cooey of shops. What on earth is the point of building in little communities where you've then got to drive in your petrol car, presumably, unless you can afford an EV, 20 k's to go and do your shopping? It just does not make any sense.
Look, I just ask in terms of the two developments and cognizant of what the General Manager said previously in terms of all of these are different and have their own different unique perspectives. So I take it with Churros you're looking at something which is, this is even though approved 40 years ago, so to speak, but a new development, this is not as staged as is the case in Mirador.
And it comes under a completely different council.
Yep.
So it's
Eurobadala as well, indeed.
Yeah.
And to that point, is it completely owned by the developer in Churros, or is there been pre-sales as well? That
Now, in terms of staging, we don't know.
Yep.
We know that this big section of land has been flattened.
Yep.
It is just dirt now. There's no grass on it. There is nothing on it. It is dirt and piles of dirt. Up until a week ago, we believed that according to the modified consent, that they would be bringing fill in to fill the low-lying sections, which you saw on that map of the flooded land. They were bringing fill in for that, and presumably thousands of tonnes of fill. We find out now, out of the blue, that they're not bringing in fill. And this has been one of our big arguments. We don't want all this dubious fill coming in, all the truckloads and everything, Suddenly, they're not bringing in fill. What they're going to do is take all the dirt from the top of the land and push it down to the bottom and fill up the low-lying land with this soil that they've currently got in mountains there. Apparently, that's what they're doing. But again, we've had problems with this sort of thing, getting the information. Now, how do we know if they're going to stage the actual sale of the houses? It doesn't seem like they've started on the smaller patch yet, which is quite different type of environment, but they both are right next to 3 EECs. They're both, in fact, the EECs encroach onto both of these blocks, and that's the main problem. I can think of lots of other places, across the highway from Hector William, which is the main road into Churros, across the highway there at Talinga, there's plenty of farmland that could be housing. I'm not saying that's where you'd go, but I can sort of see that there's plenty of farmland that's not being used. they're not really productive farms, as we know, dairying and that sort of stuff is sort of, taking a bit of a nosedive in our area. But, they may have some sort of farming value, but I reckon there'd be a lot of farmers that would flog off 10 hectares for 13.2 million at the drop of a hat. The other thing is that this development has changed hands several times over the years. There's been several different proposals. A former owner of this land was fined by the Land and Environment Court for clearing illegally. It has a history to it, and that history shouldn't be ignored. Just because we have a new council and a new modification and a new owner, it's like, oh, let's all start fresh again and it's all good, Well, no, it's not. This has got a history. This has got a 10,000-year-old history. Churros is actually, a cultural gem, and it. I can see you could do with that block of land, you could do so much more than stick a few houses on it,
Can I just ask one thing of you, Mr. Tierney? I just note on your submission, on page 12, there is an image of a lot of vegetated land there.
Yes.
And so is it your understanding, the intention of this stage, that will all be cleared? Or is that...
Yes, so the image depicted there, and it's a little difficult to see in the black and white, I appreciate, but that is forested land, and that has trees on there which have been identified as hollow-bearing trees, for example. It also contains a wide variety of flora and fauna, which is set out in the submission. Principal to perhaps some of those points, the Maroonbilla star hare, which grows only in 2 locations in New South Wales, it is a listed species. I should say it's probably relevant to you as well. In 1989, it wasn't even known to science. It grows heavily on that site. It's been documented through BioNet extensively. The elimination of the vegetation on that site, which will flow from the work certificate, which would authorise the removal of everything except, I think, from memory, perhaps 4 trees on that entire site, is going to lead to the obliteration of the star hare and every other piece of vegetation on there.
And so because of the age of... Is there a biodiversity offset arrangement for that? Not that you can offset something... Well, actually, under the current system, you can offset something even if you're going to drive it out of existence. You can pay money for it. But is that an arrangement that you're aware of for this particular site, or it doesn't come under it?
My understanding is, and perhaps this is a question more for the council because we're experiencing the same transparency issues that Coiler have, but my understanding is it's not. Because of the timing of the consent.
So it didn't apply.
Yeah, so that gives rise to yet another issue. I'm aware, and again, perhaps the council is the person to direct this question to, that there's a commercial site located fairly nearby, which was consented subject to some biodiversity constraints involving the star hare, and that particular development met significant difficulties trying to offset the star hare on that site. So it perhaps just gives you an example of the fact that when these biodiversity issues come into play, it becomes much more difficult to justify these types of developments going ahead. The second thing I should say for the committee's information is that the private developer who's taken ownership of this site and been developing these stages, in my opinion, should be to some extent recognised as being a sensible, proper developer. He, of his own volition, has taken the site to the EPBC authority and is going through that process at the moment. So I just wanted to recognise that because I do think it's important that we can say, in the case of some developers, there is a genuine wish to actually develop ethically and sensibly. I think that's something which, quite frankly, should be encouraged. And where it doesn't happen, and perhaps Coyle might be a good example of that, then it should be discouraged.
Yeah, there's other issues too. For example, for council, we put in a GIPA application, you know, a Freedom of Information application, as I know them, you know, in the old days. And that GIPA application was given a sort of an end date. So if they don't have that information for us by that date, they then don't bother with getting that information. That's then voided. So we can ask for whatever information we want. They can either look for it and find it, or they can say it's too hard to find, because of course 1984, a lot of those records are paper records, historical records, you know, so they can't find it, or they don't want to supply it, and so they say, oh, your date's up, so we don't have to supply it. Now, shouldn't there be some sort of ruling that says, well, if you can't supply it by the due date, you then have to give another date when you'll supply it by?
I think in summary, I mean, obfuscation has been the order of the day, really. Whether it's incompetence or something else, who knows? But the subdivision work certificate was issued for this work, and the council was unable to tell us that it had been issued. We found out about it because the engineer dropped around flyers on the Friday afternoon that work was going to start on the Monday. Council still had not publicised the subdivision work certificate. That's just one example of many. Failed GIPA, federal government aware that there should be a referral under the EPBC Act.
Still waiting on that.
They say that they can't tell us anything about it because it's under investigation.
Yes. I was going to say, we're coming to an end, so please, final
Just
questions.
a brief question,
Thank
Mr. Tierney. Your submission outlines 3 alternatives, and I guess they're all focused at the developer. In terms of those 31 individuals that have purchased properties there or paid that deposit, what would you foresee for them as a viable option for their future accommodation needs?
It's a good question, and it's a difficult question. It should be noted that the vast majority of the 31 blocks, as we understand it, have been sold with sunset clauses. That is, if the development doesn't proceed by a certain date, then the contract sunsets. I don't know what the precise arrangements are. That's obviously between the private individuals, but it's entirely possible that those contracts will simply sunset such that the deposit's returned and those individuals aren't left out of pocket. To the broader question of where those people ultimately might live, that really goes back to the earlier discussion about housing density, types of housing, affordable housing, things of that nature. But I think probably the question needs to be more, in a 2,000 square metre block, are we seriously dealing with affordable housing solutions where people are not going to be able to get into the market somewhere else, or are these investment homes? I think that's probably the more important question.
I just had a question about this document that you've tabled. I just wanted to clarify the author of this. What's the...
Which one's that?
This is the one dated 15th of February 2023.
Is that the desktop ecological assessment? Is her name's not on there?
It is, but I just wanted to understand how she fits into this.
She was asked to do this work for us by our public officer.
Okay.
She's a senior ecologist, and she's done this off her own bat for nothing.
Yeah.
And she's just, as it says, it's a desktop assessment.
Yep.
But she's, you can see from her opinion.
Yeah.
And that's not a proper EIS. We would like a proper EIS done, with stringent standards to modern standards.
Understand. Thank you. Yeah.
That's right. I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and your time and giving evidence and things taken on notice. The Secretariat will get back to you, but thank you very much for all of the material you have provided with us with.
Please feel free to read our submission, because I think it's a very good submission, and Gillian's responsible for a large part of that, and I just had to give her credit.
Thank you very much.